So the Wish EU project is a 2 years European project. We started on the 1st of March just this year, so we still have 1.5 years to go. It's a project with partners from 4 countries: the Netherlands, Belgium, France and Portugal, and the people involved are also, or most people are also here. And we started from the observation that we see in several European countries detention houses or small-scale detention facilities being implemented. But at the same time, that working in a detention house is very different from working in a large-scale prison, so that in order to do this in the best possible way, we need a lot of knowledge, skills, with the people that are actually implementing it. So the purpose of this project is to look at good examples, gather the knowledge and the skills that are already there. So one part of the project is go visit small-scale facilities, but then also bring together scholars, practitioners, policymakers from different countries, because everyone has its own part of the knowledge, but bringing this together is needed to really get all the knowledge and skills that we need. So this is why we are doing this learning lab. So we're inviting experts, the speakers, but then also we think that using this dialogue through this dialogue, we will co-create the knowledge that is needed. So we're collecting new knowledge, we're creating new knowledge, and then eventually we want to present these new insights in European rules on the ecosystem of detention houses and European guidelines on relational security. So these are the very concrete outputs we're working towards with these sessions.
And I just want to briefly introduce the topic of today, because when we think of work in relation to the prison system, it's always, or it's often in the context of reintegration, like what do people do after they leave prison? Sometimes, of course, people can work within prison system already. In general, it's a low-paid job, about €1 an hour. This depends slightly per country, but overall it's low-paid job. And we want to really take the topic of work to the next level. Like, what could it mean in relation to a detention house? And how can you integrate the topic of work or work within the community? Can people from the community also come and work at the detention house? What can the detention house offer to the community, for example? And what are the systemic issues that are related to it? For example, that the declaration of good behavior, I don't know if that's the best way to translate it, but often people, when they leave prison, they are not allowed to get this declaration of good behavior, which prevents them to get a good job. So even if they have the skills, they have the energy, they have the willpower, often it's still difficult to get the job. So this is what Jamie will talk about later with Ben the Box as well. But of course, there are also many interesting examples all over Europe. So this is also why we are here today. If you hear the speakers and you think of good examples yourself, please share them today as well, or share them in the chat.
So as I said before, I'm the director of the Criminal Justice Alliance. Our members work right across the criminal justice system, from victim services to policing, prisons and probation. So we really try and take a whole systemic view of improving our prison system and criminal justice system. And today we've been asked to talk about some innovations around work and employment. So I'll talk with Jamie about 4 different examples. So the first one is going to be talking about employment advisory boards. The second, which Jamie will talk about, is around Ban the Box, the Fair Checks campaign, and also about University Admissions Pledge. I'm then going to talk about lived experience leadership and a new program that we've just launched on that. And then I'm quickly at the end going to talk about how we communicate with the public about building support for employment after release from prison, or employment for people in the criminal justice system, with some new research that's just been published by frameworks that we supported. So I'm going to kick off first with employment advisory boards. So employment advisory boards are relatively new. They're currently in about 30 prisons in England and Wales. And the idea is that employers form a group of advisors within a prison to really help to work with both the NGOs working in that prison, with the prison staff, with the education, the teachers in that prison, to really help them think about what a pathway into employment should look like, how to think about what employers need, and to encourage other employers to be open and think about recruiting people who are leaving prison and who have convictions. And the three aims are to create a culture of sustainable employment within prisons, to make sure that people are being provided with the right employability skills, and also to bring that kind of network of employers who want to work with people leaving prison together with the prisons. And the logos at the bottom are just some of the organisations that are working in prisons. So this includes Timpsons, who do key cutting and dry cleaning, have outlets all around the UK. Greggs, which is a baker's, Halfords, which is doing kind of car repairs. So there's some more and more employers in the UK now are actually starting not just to engage with this, but actually to promote within their corporate social responsibility work about employing people. And we know that there's obviously big gaps in recruitment at the moment. And so I think this is a really good opportunity. And the employment advisory boards, I've been really impressed with, because they work with the people in prison as well. So everyone's voices are heard about planning about those employment pathways. And as Veronique said, not just to be focused on a job, but actually about career pathways, having academies within prisons, and then support after release and jobs after release. So not just learning a skill in prison and then leaving and not being able to use it, really thinking about how you join up what happens inside and outside, but also importantly, how you change the minds of employers, how you get other employers to speak to others, to really encourage a change of culture and of mindset.
Ban the Box is a campaign for employers to ban the criminal conviction declaration at the application stage of a job offer. So then you do your interview without prejudice, you'll get your offer, and then at that stage, if there's relevant convictions, you will declare your conviction at that stage. Essentially, the three key asks that the Ban the Box campaign asks for is to remove the prejudice, to understand that it's okay to ask about criminal convictions, but to do it at the right stage. Be considered, so risk assess the role, and if it doesn't need a declaration, then there shouldn't be one. And also be clear, if you must ask about criminal convictions, be very clear when you're going to ask this, as you shouldn't land it at the end of an interview to put someone off. You should be very clear that at the offer stage, for example, we will ask about them. So if we move to the next one. So currently the Ban the Box campaign in Northern Ireland that I'm a case study for, it's taken its inspiration from England. So they had a successful launch with over 150 businesses pledged, with 1 million job roles in the UK positively impacted. In Northern Ireland, it launched in September 2021, so arguably not the best time to launch a program like this. But currently there's 13 businesses pledged with 56,500 roles positively impacted, which equates to 7.1% of Northern Ireland's employee jobs, which is huge. They also run Seeing is Believing events that brings employers into prisons so they can hear the challenges faced by people while in prison, coming up to and after release. And just on that note, when I was released, when I came home, I had 5 or 6 years working experience under my belt. I was in the final year of my bachelor's degree. I had 11 high school qualifications, and applying for over 100 job roles, I got 3 interviews, 2 of which didn't ask, and 1 of which was my previous employer. So it's a very, it's a very serious problem where I'm from. And we'll go to the next one. So the Fair Checks campaign is slightly different. It's run by the charities Unlock and Transform Justice. So essentially, in the UK, even once your period of having to declare is over, most criminal convictions stay on your record for life if they do a standard or enhanced background check. So if you want to work in a school or with children, even if you're not deemed a risk to them, it will still be there and employers can still discriminate. So as you can see, 1 in 6 people have a criminal record in the UK, and it's actually 1 in 3 men of working age. So it'll be disclosed in our records for life. 75% of employers discriminate against applicants based on a criminal record, and 50% of employers would not recruit people with convictions. So even when I finished my Master of Science degree from quite a high ranking university, there's 50% of employers that won't consider me straight away because of my conviction. So the campaign's 3 key asks are: no automatic disclosure of cautions, wipe the slate clean for childhood offences, and stop forcing people to reveal short prison sentences forever. Next one. So the Longford Trust is a charity that offers scholarships for people who have been in prison to go to university. I'm currently a Longford scholar, so they're supporting me and are the only reason that I'm fit to attend the university that I can. They also offer financial help, mentoring, employability support and internships, which I'm currently on a paid internship with the CJA as well. And I have to say that they are really great. Anytime I have any concerns, any problems, any questions, I can contact them any hour of the day. And the director usually gets back to me within minutes. And so far, the CJA has supported 6 paid internships, so it's a mutual benefit.
Yeah, just on that, I'll say that, you know, it's very much that a benefit for us as well as the individuals in terms of the expertise and the capacity that the interns bring us, as well as us being able to offer some support and reference and work experience to the interns themselves. Yeah, and I'll pay you later for the nice words, Jamie, thanks.
Happy days. So university and college admissions at the minute are a huge problem. Well, they always have been. For courses with a DBS requirement, universities must ask about and assess criminal records. So that's anything to do with childcare, working in the health service, working with vulnerable adults or young people. And assessing disclosures fairly and proportionately is key to making sure talented candidates with criminal records aren't unfairly excluded from regulated programs. However, the key is the fairly and proportionately, because there's no guidelines and no law regarding that. So for non-DBS courses, universities can choose whether to ask. So the criminal convictions declaration on the left is actually from my university, and you'll see that they choose to ask about relevant unspent convictions. So the problems with that approach is that asking about convictions is a deterrent or chilling effect on applicants, which may inadvertently discriminate against other groups underrepresented at a university. There's no evidence that asking applicants about criminal records reduces crime on campus. There's no obvious legal basis, and there's an impact on the individual student, which I'll talk to you about now. So I studied my postgraduate certificate last year in the same course that I'm studying my Masters of Science in this year at the same university. And if you're to believe the world rankings, they've been the top university in the world for 6 years running. However, after a long and arduous process last year of declaring and coming up with this decision that I needed a monthly or a termly welfare call, which never happened, this year I had to redeclare, and we're now at loggerheads again over the same convictions which haven't changed from last year. So it's very much an ongoing issue for me, and at the minute we don't have a solution. Their solution is for me to fly to a different country to come for an in-person meeting once a term for a couple of minutes, which obviously is completely disproportionate. So that's where we're at.
Thanks, Jamie. And thanks for sharing that experience. I know that at the moment it's really tough for you. And I think this is why it's so important that we've got about this, because as Veronique said, this is around thinking about work and careers and aspirations, and going to university and getting higher education is a really important stepping stone for many people who want to do that. And so, for us at the CJA and many of our members, we're trying to remove those barriers which prevent people from achieving their dreams and their aspirations, and and fully using their talents like Jamie's got. And just to add on to this, so I was working on something with Prisoners Education Trust, where I used to work before, which has now been taken on by the charity Unlock, which is getting universities to sign up to a pledge to take that box to not ask for courses that don't require it. So you can see some of the examples of universities that have signed up to that. And there's just some advice that they sort of give out about taking a whole institution approach, focusing on inclusion, and really thinking about the wording of their promotional materials as well. So just following on from that, another piece of work that we're doing at the CJA is about supporting people who have been impacted by the criminal justice system to work in our sector, so to work in the criminal justice or the social justice sector, because many people want to improve the system once they've seen, how, what needs improving, directly and been personally impacted. And so many people will work in peer support roles, so supporting other individuals or going into schools and talking about their experiences. But actually what we see in the UK is that a glass ceiling really preventing people from progressing into more senior roles where they're actually designing services or being involved in policy work or research. So this is a quote from one of our lived experience expert group members, Paula, who's head of prisoner engagement, she's a lived experience leader. And she says it's time to change the diversity of the criminal justice workforce and seek to ensure it's more representative of those it serves and embraces the challenge and human wisdom that they bring with them. So we think this is really important because it actually will lead to systemic change if we have a mix of lived and learned experience in decision-making roles and roles with power and influence. We produced a report, which I'll put the link to at the end, called Change from Within, which was about this glass ceiling that people who've been directly impacted by the criminal justice system face. They tend to get pigeonholed and stuck in roles that are peer-led roles rather than moving into more senior level roles. And this is some of the barriers. And one of the barriers we identified was a lack of leadership development support. And so we've now launched a project called Elevate, Leaders for Change, which is about addressing that barrier, about supporting people who are currently working in the system who've been directly impacted with a year-long intensive leadership development programme, where they'll have residentials, where they'll work on their personal development, where they'll work on practical skills. They'll have coaching, they'll have clinical supervision, they'll have weekly online workshops, monthly in-person workshops. And we're doing this in partnership with the University of Westminster. So there'll be action research projects, and there'll also be a senior level work placement. So the idea is at the end of the year, they'll be ready to go on to take on board more senior level roles. And importantly, we're also working with employers to work with them to develop tools and resources about what makes an inclusive senior leadership team and workforce, because we know that even if people employ people with convictions or people who've been involved in the criminal justice system in those lower paid service delivery roles, often their senior level boardrooms and senior leadership teams don't have that lived experience, and therefore can be a hostile environment sometimes for someone with lived experience to come and work in. So we want to make sure we're working with employers and with individual emerging leaders. And this is inspired by the Just Leadership USA program, which I saw 5 years ago when I went to the States as part of a travel fellowship, and also links in with the Global Freedom Fellowship, which the Incarceration Nations Network have recently set up. Many of you will know Dr. Baz Dreisinger, so she's leading that. And we were very fortunate to have Baz and the Vice President of Just Leadership attend the launch of Elevate, which is the photo at the bottom, and the lady in the middle with the green trousers, that's Nola, she's the project manager, and to the right hand side, 2 of our lived experience expert group. And just finally, on how we communicate about people leaving prison and people getting into employment, just wanted to make you aware that last week some new research has been published by Frameworks UK, looking specifically at how we communicate about this issue. So I'll put the links in the chat afterwards, but CJA were involved in the development of this research and are involved in promoting it. So hence including it in this presentation, but I hope it's really useful because I think it's a really important part of the story, how we communicate about this out to the public.
Thank you very much, Jamie and Nina. I really like that you keep saying career versus work. Can you maybe try to define what for you the most important elements are with the distinction between these two words?
Yeah, well, I think, as you said at the beginning, Veronique, I think mostly we think about just getting people into a job and, you know, and don't really think anything further. We might think some of our metrics for measurement in the UK now involve not just people being in a job after release, but being still in that job 6 months later. So that's some progress about thinking about sort of retention, but that's where it stops. And I think there's a real lack then of aspiration. I think a lot because there's an impression that because people won't necessarily have many formal qualifications in prison, that therefore that kind of keeps our aspirations for people low. But from working in a prison education organisation, I know very well that even if people don't have formal qualifications when they come into prison, often if you engage them and they start learning, they'll actually very quickly learn, and there's a huge amount of talent. And also we'll have, you know, people that are coming into prison that do have qualifications and that can progress up to degrees and higher education. So I think, you know, for many people that is a real option, and so we need to be really thinking about what's the progression opportunities for people, so they don't not sort of left at that entry level role that we're really thinking about, and what's the next step and what's the next step. And like I said, particularly for people working in the sector, we've seen people that have been 10 years doing peer support work, and if they want to continue to do that, that's obviously absolutely fine. But for many, they've not had anyone to say to them, well, actually, what could be the next step? How can you use your lived experience, not just in that very direct way every day, but actually to influence what a system looks like, or doing research or influencing policy? What are the other options available for you to utilize that? Because also, if you're also doing that frontline work every day and using your story, for example, going into schools, you're having to kind of relive that experience. So what people have told us is that can be quite, lead to sort of burnout and well-being and triggering of different things. And actually after an amount of time, that's not good for someone's mental health and well-being. So actually the importance of moving up into different levels where you're still using your expertise. Jamie is using his expertise as part of of his internship in order to help support our policy work, without having to use his own sort of story every day. So it's really about thinking a bit differently about those careers.
From a first-hand sort of perspective, the difference between a career and a job is that a career is something that you want to do and something that you want to continue doing. A job, like I've been in stages in the past, if I have bills to pay, if there's rent due or something, you'll work any job doing anything to pay the bills. But if we want to make the process of desistance easier, then you need to be doing something that you enjoy, that kind of fulfills you on a deeper level. Because if you're just going to work every day and you're dreading it, you hate where you're working, you hate what you're doing, or as Nina says, you're using your story and that's it, you become your story, that's all you are. And it very quickly leads to burnout and depression. And I don't want to say falling back into crime easily, but it would certainly make it more attractive than if you're working in something that you love.
I'm just very curious, Nina, if you could very briefly tell us what were the outcomes of the research of the Framework Institute you were mentioning at the end of the presentation, if that's possible.
Yeah, so there were sort of 5 key sort of asks, sort of recommendations that they made. So the first one was about talking about people leaving prison as people first. So we've done a lot of work in the UK, and we've talked about this on the Erasmus programme around language and the importance of that. And we've seen a real shift actually in England and Wales from using terms like offender or ex-offender to using people with lived experience, people who've been in prison, people are in prison, people with convictions, to put that people first approach. And so, yeah, so that was a really interesting sort of finding. But also they also talked about rather than using words like reintegration and sort of coming back into society or second chances. It was really interesting, some of the findings about that. It makes then it seem that this is something separate and the community is here and prison is here, whereas actually some of the other language that they suggest is more about seeing it as part of the community. So that was really interesting in terms of language. The second recommendation was about focusing on making progress for our society, so to show why supporting people leaving prison matters, and how it holds us back as a country if we're not doing this, so tapping into that value of national progress. Frameworks, if any of you know their work, will often look at what metaphors work, what images and metaphors work around how we can help the public to capture an idea of something. And the metaphor that worked when they did all their sort of polling and focus groups was this metaphor of bridges to explain what support's needed. So thinking about what makes a stable bridge, how do you have that support for somebody that's leaving prison, what does that look like? The fourth one was about pragmatism, so to emphasize sort of practical solutions, to say this is something that's common sense, that this is sensible, this is practical, pragmatic. Again, that's another value that the public sort of buy into, this idea of pragmatism. And then finally, the last sort of headline was really around telling stories that show how solutions work, to show how we can do better. Because often we forget that, we talk about what the problem is, but we don't always talk about what would then be the solution to that. And I think as well, they gave a workshop last weekend we had a taster day for the Elevate session for people with lived experience thinking about applying for the Elevate program. And we had a whole session about narratives and where people, how people might tell their story or their narrative. And often people won't necessarily add on, and actually this is what could have made it better, or this is what was the barrier and this is what the solution is. So people found that really useful, just to be reminded of the importance of talking about solutions, whether that's a policy solution or whether it's a practical solution, rather than just talking about the problem, because there's a huge degree of fatalism. I think that nothing will change, it'll always look like this, there's nothing that we can do differently. And I think everybody on this call, from hearing introductions, is involved in reimagining and thinking about things differently and new and innovative solutions. So sometimes it's easy to forget to talk about those when we're sort of talking about the problems, but I think it helps then to kind of make the public understand that there is things that can be done differently. But I can share the link, Jana. That's just a very brief overview.
Oh, I was asking, like you're lobbying for ban the box, which is after prison, and why not lobby for deleting the box completely at a policy level?
I guess the focus is small steps. So I have no issue declaring my convictions. And then I suppose when it started in England and Wales, if you have a prison sentence shorter than 3 years, the declaration period is only 4 years. But in Northern Ireland, it's actually 10 years. So for me, it's a huge issue, because then I have a further 7 or 8 years or something to declare this issue with employers. I don't want to work in any industries that require a DBS check, I don't think. So for me, once the spent period is gone, or if they don't ask and give me an interview first, and that's what's important to me. And I know that if I get the interview, I can highlight my skills and highlight my just my personal characteristics enough to get the job and to get the offer, and then talk about my convictions and kind of the background to them, instead of them just seeing the rap sheet. You can have a conversation and explain, right, this happened because of this, this, and this. This is what I done to rectify it, and this is how I am now. And I think that's kind of the most important thing.
Yeah, just to add to that, so the Fair Checks campaign that Jamie was talking about was about the policy change. So I think it's about working in like a dual approach, so to work with employers while we still have our current system, to try to encourage them to remove the box and to deal with convictions in a more case-by-case basis, as Jamie described, but also absolutely not ignoring, the need to have policy change. We have actually secured, in the UK recently, some positive changes around criminal records. It didn't go far enough, but we are seeing some gradual steps towards this. So yeah, very much it's about taking a both approach, working with employers to help them understand, but absolutely working with policymakers. Interestingly, we've been working with our Ministry of Justice and our Department of Home Affairs thinking and our Prison and Probation Service, so the government agencies, about exactly that, about their processes. So they have a program, and again I can share a link, called Going Forward into Employment, which recruits people leaving prison into low-level jobs within the civil service. So that could be, you know, in job centres doing that sort of work. But also what we realised a few years ago was that actually the department, in terms of Prison and Probation Service and Ministry of Justice, was not employing so many people through this scheme as other government departments, and really they should be the ones leading the way. So we've been working really constructively with them over the past 2 or 3 years, and now we've seen a big increase, and they now have senior level people within the Prison and Probation Service with lived experience. One spoke at our event last week. So it's still sort of baby steps. Initially, they had a blanket ban on certain offences, which now they're taking a more case-by-case approach to it. They also previously only had people just about leaving prison. That was part of the criteria. And now they're having people that have been released for a bit on licence, on probation, able to apply for these roles as well. And the lived experience leads are doing some great work working with us with Elevate and thinking about how do we progress people, how do we build a career in government and civil service rather than just an entry-level job. So yeah, we are making a bit of headway with that in England and Wales.
Typically any governmental job in Northern Ireland you will have a DBS background check for, and it's very unlikely you'll work for any of even the local councils or the government or anything like this. The private sector, a lot of the big employers, so the multinationals and stuff, will all have a criminal conviction question, and typically they don't. I think one or two that do, that employ people with convictions, is the likes of Asda and Tesco and these big supermarkets that are a bit more, that try to be more community focused recently. And then typically your NGOs and your non-profits, some of them ask, some of them don't. I did see a case where someone couldn't get a job because of the insurance risk when they had a conviction for arson from 30 years ago. Although I did also work for a charity here, and they asked me after the offer stage. So I done my interview, I got the job offer, and then we had a conversation about my convictions on a very case-by-case basis.
So there were some interesting thoughts that were shared. For example, when can you start with career? Because with work you can start at the end, more or less, but can you start with the idea of career in prison? And is it more easy to start working on a career in a detention house? And also the topic of people from abroad that are in prisons, so who do not speak the national language very well, what to do with this group, because it's relatively high in each country. And then the topic of career becomes more difficult.
I think one important thing that came back from several people is the importance of the link between inside and outside. So, for instance, Pascal gave the example of German prisons, where there is a bakery inside prison, and then in the weekend, the neighbors are queuing up in front of the prison to buy their bread, which also helps with communication, or like the way in which people perceive prison. Then Fabian explained that in Norway, this working with the import model, which is also done in Belgium, so that schools from outside provide their teaching inside a prison, which is a way to really establish this relationship inside and outside. And also in Czechia, it's important that, or it's valuable that some companies are providing work inside prison, but then also the same companies providing this work outside prison, which makes this bridge. Jana, please interrupt me if I don't summarize you well. And also it was stressed how important it is to train people before they're ready for the regular working market. So even after prison, to make the threshold low enough to train people, but then also train employers, which was also, I think, explained in the in the presentation. So approach both so that the bridge is made between both. And then Philip, he made a plea about how difficult it is to provide good vocational training inside a prison, and that it is important for government to also hire people with criminal record, or to, give the people the chances that they're promising in their policy, but also do it themselves.
Before in the breakout room, I was a little bit still frustrated about the employment inside the prisons, that it's always low, repetitive work where you don't need any skills, where you cannot make a connection between the trainings you have in prison and the work that you have in prison. What are you planning to do in the detention house in Kortrijk?
We've only started, so I have to give my experience by 6 inmates who have passed until now. All the inmates who come here, and I don't call them inmates, we call them residents here, they get days to go out and to search for work. So after 2 weeks of stay here in Kortrijk, they all are starting to find a job in the community. So one of the residents worked for 3 weeks out of this detention house. He was released and he is still working at a place where he started during his time here in the detention house. And the other residents are now looking for work, and they are helped by our social service, as well as a counselor who comes from the Flemish to give help to everyone who is incarcerated. So they are helping to find a job they really want to do. They go out, they have to apply for the job, and then they leave our detention house every day to go and work in a community. So they can save some money already then to find a place to stay and to start their life outside the prison.
It's interesting that in our group, one of the persons said, I feel ashamed of the low paid job, which is only €1, but they looked at it and it's very difficult to pay people more in prison, because then it's all from the prison service, which is interesting distinction or benefit when you have detention houses, is that the money is paid by employers from the community. Which is really interesting,
and they are paid normal wages.
Yeah.
So it was 14 or 15 euros an hour they here, and so it was really good.
Okay.
We started with the discussion of keeping the job while you are in prison, if it is possible. So we looked in the countries, but also talked about the quality of jobs that are often the case if you are in prison. And then we talked also about the benefits of small-scale prisons or small-scale detention houses, because it was the word that told, gave an example in Portugal of a small prison, and almost, I think everyone is working there. And if you look in Europe, that's quite often the case, that small prisons or other forms, that most of them are working. If you compare that to big prisons where it is like a prize, I think that they told that. So that was interesting. And then, of course, we also talked about the fact that it's important to have a prison nearby a city center. And it was Sarah who is working in a prison now who is far away from city center, and it's very hard to go working. I think they bought bikes to give them to go to the city center, but she also worked in Ghent and Dendermonde, which are prisons like in the city center, and that was much more easier to give them work in the city center. So that was the fact to be in a community. It's important.
So hi everyone, I'm Duarte. I'm the executive director of Reshape, a non-profit based in Portugal. And we have a social business called Reshape Ceramics, and I will explain a little bit in detail further in the road, the Reshape Ceramics. But this started why we started working on the employability side and on the job work side, because we have been working on the soft skills development programs, rethinking the prison system, and doing lots of advocacy. But at some point, what we were seeing is the turning point in terms of coming back to community was independence, was autonomy, and usually having a job even before a career is part of the path, so you can begin to redesign your own life again. So this is our starting points on the employability. And this was mainly what we found out at that time was there's this strong correlation between unemployment and recidivism. Of course, and I think it was Nina that mentioned, it's not only the job, is the retention, is the progress, is it would be easy to find jobs to everyone. Of course, we would need the government and companies to be involved in that process. But if people can't maintain the job, if the company is not ready to also be part of this process and to help their new employees, things will not work. Or even other things, like if you don't have a place to stay, if you have health problems, etc., it will be very difficult to maintain a job. So a job is key, but if we don't work on other dimensions of people before and to help them, it's also difficult to keep the job. But this was the starting point of Reshape Ceramics. But even before, Reshape Ceramics is born from a failed project. So we never intended to have a business of our own. So we are focused on advocacy, on changing the entire system as an NGO. But we wanted to, like what you are doing in England, to convince companies to get enrolled in this process of creating opportunities. And we have a company in Portugal called Delta that is very well known, like as the biggest Portuguese multinational and more social responsible family business in Portugal. And they have, so we have 49 prisons in Portugal, and they are present in 11 of them. So they have workshop units where they do the maintenance of their coffee machines inside, and they pay exactly the same to the people in prison as they pay in their factories outside. So they are a very good example. And we thought, okay, everyone in Portugal wants to be like Delta. So let's give them the opportunity to be like Delta and convince them to go to prisons and do the same and pay a fair wage, because we have several bad examples as well in Portugal of companies paying €1 or less per hour. And we were not able to convince any company. But in the meanwhile, we visited several prisons and we found lots of spaces, empty spaces, but others that were like old pottery studios, old wood machines, etc., that with minimum investment would be possible to just start a workshop unit. So we found this old pottery studio and we decided, okay, if no one wants to do, let's do ourselves, and let's show how amazing talent have been throwing away, amazing economic opportunities, because you can have empty and free spaces, usually in city centers, because prisons are very close by. And let's show to others that this is possible. Of course, it's more easier said and on paper than done. So I think if we would start again nowadays, probably we would not start with ceramics, because we knew nothing about ceramics. We only knew, okay, we need a kiln, we'll need some stoneware, and we need design and someone to teach, and we need money to pay them. So we were able to convince some foundations to give us that money to pay them. So we launched Reshape Ceramics. And Reshape Ceramics as this very easygoing, and now today here everyone is in the same field. So we believe in second chances. We believe there's amazing talent. We believe people just want to have a minimum of dignity that prisons don't give. And so through this handcraft, although it's a routine, repetitive process, but it's a very therapeutical activity as well. So we can work lots of metaphors of our life through ceramics as well. Like we can do everything well in the process of our production, and at the end the piece is broken in the kiln, because there's lots of external factors, from humidity in the air, peaks of energy in the grid, so things that are external from our life. And we know our life nowadays, and it's the same for me as for you, sometimes things don't go well, and we have made everything well. So working this process on society is not necessarily against you, although they need to be worked on. It's amazing how anxieties and some anger against community in itself can be decreased. But at the same time, doing these products was a very nice way to communicate and to get inside people's houses. So this was the main idea on, can we tell a story like the bakery you mentioned in Germany, instead of going to prison, but we going to your houses, and put here the Portuguese people at the table talking about the prison system. Because I think one of the first problems in our society, at least in Portugal, is people don't talk about the prison system. So everyone has an opinion on the healthcare system, social security system, education system, but usually the opinions on the prison system is they have too many rights, they should suffer more, and we should lock them for more time. So can we try to reverse that type of arguments through interesting stuff? So usually the first reaction we had around the products were, but it's really them doing this, you are not producing this in factories, you are. So we needed to like get pictures and stories, and oh, it's really them producing the products. Of course we made the design, we trained them, but the idea of showing there's no difference between a person that is incarcerated and a person outside. So it's just a matter of sometimes opportunities. So this is a mantra, a tagline, wherever we stolen from other projects, of course, sorry. So we don't hire people to produce ceramics, we produce ceramics to hire people. So our idea of growing and being economic sustainable is just to create more opportunities and to reinvest. So the several goals we have is, first, a path to welcome back these people in society, and I will explain how we do this. Inspire other businesses, and it's amazing how through this other businesses have approached us like, we want to do the same, and before we were trying to sell the idea but without results, and also increase the awareness in society in general. So I think nowadays we can say with some safety that we are already in more than 5,000 houses in Portugal. So at least people have talked once in a positive way about the prison system. And the thing is, of course, we want to increase this. So how do we work with them? And in this program, so we start with a trainees program that is based on a soft skills development program, and then a ceramics, like 4 or 5 sessions for them just to test several techniques. And then from there, we can't hire everyone, we hire them. Okay, so we have 2 production sites. We have one inside prison and one outside. So we want to be, as Nina mentioned today, this bridge. We want them to be released on a Monday, and on Tuesday to be working with them. We are not still there yet, although we have done already some of these bridges. And when they start working with us inside prison, so in this transition employment phase, they started to get paid a normal wage as in the outside. So apart from Delta that we mentioned, we are the best employer in the country in terms of wages, because there's no law in Portugal about the prison labor. So for us, okay, at least it's the general law, okay, at least the minimum wage. And so some of these people inside prison work with us 2 afternoons a week, because we still don't have enough demand to produce every day. And they receive more, sometimes the double, for those that work every week, every day inside prison. So it was interesting because after the first month, we had 300 people registering, saying, I want to go to the pottery studio. So it was the entire prison. But then we hire them on the outside, in the studio we have outside, and the idea is then to go to the labor market. So for this to be a transition and not to stay with us all the time. We have thought about this as a non-profit, as a business model, a 3D business model. So the social impact, I think, is easy to relate and see immediately. Like we don't want to work with professional ceramists or artisans. The economic impact on them first, but also on the NGO, on the suppliers we choose, all national, and then environmental. So can we show that the ceramic industry can be more sustainable than the normal industry? So we recycle all the pottery, we upcycle the products that we can sell to be in the tableware. Like for example, we have some bowls. This can't be used, for example, for food, but they are not broken because there are some mistakes in the production. So we are doing candles with other brands through those products, for example. And so we just upcycle the products. And the impact is on different levels. Like nowadays, we have the system calling us from other prisons, like we have a company, but they don't know how to do, can you help them, how to take care of the insurance, how to take care. So it's interesting, like we are changing a little bit the mindset, although I would say in terms of routines and stuff, I would like us to be able to change more, because it's still very not dynamic, very static, all the routine and all the prison rules. In the people, guards, staff, people involved, it's amazing. Society in general and the environment, not only the products I was mentioning, but also like we are reusing old kilns that were just throwing away in the prisons, old empty spaces that were not being used. So there's lots of economic value that can be done in a fair way, also with the prison system, while we are having impacts in people's lives. So I truly believe that it's possible to align these two. Of course, it's very important to regulate and make sure you have red flags, but I think we are proving that. And the biggest impact we had with Reshape Ceramics, and it was not intended, was on the advocacy side. Like in less than a year, it was amazing, like where the story went. Like at some point, it looked like journalists were making a competition between them to see who write more articles about us. Or so it was really interesting. Like we can change perception, and we are only like currently we only have the possibility of hire 5 people at each time, so 4 inside and 1 outside, although we have helped already around 10, I think. And in the rest of the NGO, we help more than 100 people per year, but this is the focus. So it's an amazing advocacy tool and communication tool to reach other people. And of course, people. So we have worked, as I told, with 10 people inside and 3 outside. We do not decide who works with us based on type of crime, age, or gender. We don't care about that. For us, it's much more important, like their motivation, if they will continue in the geographic area we are, because then we want to continue to support them on the outside, and then the social support they have or not. So if we need to decide between 2, we'll choose the one without the social support or without anyone. And it's amazing, just to tell you a story of one of them. Like the first time we met him, he was like a completely homeless inside prison. So he was not taking bath, not cutting their nails. He was not looking to you in the eyes, always looking down. It even looked like he was over medicated, like the speech was very slow. And after 1 month with us, just because we're treating them by name, paying a fair wage, and they were seeing also the result of their work, and that's very interesting, the self-esteem of, whoa, I made this. It completely changed. And I knew recently, he's already outside, he paid for his driving license recently, he's saving money, he's taking care of his father and his sister. So life changed, and only because an opportunity, a fair opportunity, was created. So yeah, and then there was also this pump in terms of countries and resellers and stories and people wanting to sell our own story. And it's amazing. It's amazing to see what is possible to do through a product in terms of communication and in terms of changing mindsets and perceptions. Challenges that we face currently in Portugal. So as I mentioned, there is no prison labor law in Portugal. So for example, the people that work inside prison for us, we can't hire them. So this is a service that the prison itself does to us. So we pay to the prison and then the prison pays them. So this means, for example, although we are paying a normal and fair wage, we can't pay, for example, social security, or we can, you know, the normal taxes that could count as time for them when they leave prison. Other thing is, of course, logistics and bureaucracies. And I think this is because we are talking about a big prison. So if this would happen in a small scale detention, it would be much easier. You can't imagine what happened in the months that we need to leave we buy the raw material, so from the supplier. So a big truck needs to get inside the prison, so it seems like for them it's the world war for the prison system, because logistics is impossible to deal for them because it's changing the routine. So in a small scale, things would be much easier, like just a phone call. Look, they will let things there. And insurance companies, it was really difficult, for example, to have an insurance company willing to do the insurance, the normal labor insurance for them. Several of them refuse to do the insurance. So we still have, although our constitution, and for example in Portugal, people that are incarcerated can vote. Okay, so in Portugal it's very clear that a person in the prison system does not lose any rights besides their freedom. So this is a theory, of course. So in theory, an insurance company cannot make a distinguish between someone that is inside the prison or outside. Although, okay, they can give different risks. It's fine. I accept that. Although for me, I don't see a different risk. But this happens, okay? And you can't get around it. You just need to get another insurance company. And of course there's other issues, but in terms of bringing the challenges we face during our work is this. So yeah, this is a very specific, just to close my presentation, I think this is a very specific small project example, but coming from, I would say, from the social worker side and less from the research side. But every time I read some researches around this, everything happens there. With these 4 people, we can see all the researchers saying, like, pay them a fair wage, treat them with dignity, give them a job they relate with or they are happy with, give them an opportunity and a bridge to the outside to continue to develop those skills. Everything is happening in these 5 to 10 people annually. So it's amazing to see in practice things that sometimes are just through policies trying to push. But yeah, thank you. Feel free to make all the questions.
I really like the way that you say give people a fair opportunity, so not just simply an opportunity. And also when we're talking about work and careers, I think for me, I tend to focus a lot on how to increase skill sets in people. But then when I hear you talk about labor law, insurances, that's super interesting because it's so needed to also look at that side, because they go hand in hand. You can, And I saw that when I was working with Exodus as well, people really motivated to work. They worked on themselves in prison, but then they weren't offered a job because of all these different rules. So it's thank you for sharing that part.
Welcome.
Thank you for this nice and inspiring presentation, Duarte. Two things hit me, and one was at the end of your presentation, you said something about you shouldn't be lifetime sentenced to not have a job. The judge didn't say that. You just had to be in prison. That was your punishment, not a lifetime sentence to unemployment or being not being able to get an insurance. But the other thing that hit me was your sentence that said we produce to hire. Maybe that's necessary in Portugal, but in the Netherlands, the government sentences you to prison, and there are a lot of unfulfilled jobs, especially from governmental organizations. So how easy would it be, or nice would it be, that we train people while being sentenced, incarcerated, to one of the jobs that are uneasy to fulfill? That would be an opportunity we should think about, maybe.
I think there, unfortunately, it's really difficult for them to be hired by the government after, or to public services to, so train them on things that they can eventually do after to those organizations. Public organizations usually will not work, or it will be a very precarious type of job without contracts and stuff. So unfortunately, although we, similar to France, we have a big percentage of public servants as the force work in Portugal, it's very difficult to put there. So that's one of the problems on when some of the prisons work a lot with city halls, municipalities, or public companies around, is because after they don't have a continuation. And usually if you do this with private companies or NGOs, you can have the continuation, or at least they can try to have that bridge that link the inside with the outside.
What are your plans for growth? I mean, do you have any plans there?
Yeah, we have lots of plans and and dreams, but well, the first one and the first goal is to be sustainable. So the project is still not yet sustainable. So we spend more money monthly than the one we are able to do with the sales. When we reach that, the NGO needs to decide, and this is something we have discussed several times at the board level, that is, do we really to keep the focus on growing, or just keep as sustainable as possible, but as an advocacy tool? And of course, it's providing some opportunities, but then the idea is, no, let's convince others to do it, because in Portugal we have 12,000 people incarcerated, so it's probably not a lot compared with your countries, although in comparison by 100,000 inhabitants is a lot. And the thing is, we will not grow, let's be very pragmatic, we will not grow to employ all of them. Although I believe we can be competitive in terms of, so I don't see a difference in a non-profit or a social enterprise. Why not compete with the normal Portuguese ceramics industry? So if big factories employ 100, 200, 300 people, why not growing there? I don't think we are going there. Okay, just popping up a question on in the non-profit sector. I think we should be ambitious as in the corporate side, with only one difference, or two differences. The first one is all the profits are reinvested, and the second one, sorry, I forgot the second one.
Do you think it's fair that people inside the prison, which don't have any costs of living, like rent, energy costs by now, costs for food, they have the same wage as people on the outside? Because when I was starting and thinking, I really had in Belgium, we don't have the problem. In Belgium, as a prisoner, you have to make less than 6,000 euros, because when you make less than 6,000 euros as a civilian, you don't pay taxes. So the prison system itself stays under this 500 euros a month. So, and in prison, 500 euros is a lot. Yeah. But I had an ex-student, he was really clever. He stayed in semi-liberty. So he went working during daytime and he went in. Normally it's in the normal path you follow. They do it for 6 months. So in 6 months you can save. They save averagely 1,000 euros a month. And after 6 months, they are out and they have 6,000 euros. They can pay the guarantee for your apartment and everything. He stayed 1 year and 6 months because of course he was clever. He did, I don't have to pay anything. He already sat in prison for 13 years. So a year less or more, he didn't have a family to take care of. So, and that is a little bit what I fear also in the detention houses. Okay, it's a short time, but I have an ethical problem with the fact also that people, they don't have to manage their own economy.
Yeah, I think it's not a mean question. It's a fair question. It's something we should discuss deeply. It's the model. So there are other models, like I know Italy, Brazil, and maybe other European countries. Like for every 3 days of work, you have one reduced to your sentence, for example. So I think creating, at least in Portugal, it's not mandatory to work, so you can't oblige anyone to work, but maybe you can align incentives where people are willing to work, because maybe they don't need money, so they are not willing or motivated to work. But if you can be released earlier, why not? And we know routines, work, teamwork, dealing with managing and the direct orders is something that all of us, not only people incarcerated, need to work in ourselves. So why not align incentives and create this type of models? Catalonia, I know they pay, for example, 70% of the wage, of the minimum wage, and then the 30% is to pay the costs of living. So I'm in theory, then I would need to see how to do this, but I would be completely okay if they have the fair opportunities we mentioned, that they could have a reduced sentence and they could pay for some parts of the costs, like paying rent, paying for food, but then this rent or the place they stay should be good, not the ones we have in Portugal. So we can't ask them for pay 300 euros and then they have a broken glass, okay? So food should be good. So if they are paying for their food, food should be good. So, but I'm okay, because that's what living is. That's what we all have. We pay our rent, we pay our food, we pay our costs, and that's what gives them autonomy. But then fair wage, good conditions, etc. Not so you need to work on both. But this is a discussion. I understand the arguments of people saying the opposite. No, you can't pay less than a minimum wage, or you can't reduce sentence because then you are de-aligning, or you will use that as an excuse to pay less. Or I understand. So I think we should try to find an hybrid model that could align all these factors, and also that's what means treating them as an adults. Because I think in prisons, what we are doing is treating them as kids. We go to prisons and prison directors showing us the works, the manual works they do with the cupboards and stuff. And when I go to my kids' school, it's similar. So it looks like we are looking for them as kids, and they are not, and they don't want to be treated as well. So I think it's possible to align all of this, and we need to think more deeply on that.
The reason why we have these sessions is, of course, like Helene already mentioned, that you have the European prison rules, and we are trying and creating European rules on the ecosystem of detention houses. So we are using these learning labs to really write these rules together with the input of you. Next session is December 6th, which is about differentiation in relation to detention houses.